No, James, it's not Destoroyah! It's Destoroyah. See, look at its official name. Destoroyah. Huh. Well, I'm still gonna call him Destoroyah anyway. Hello, people of the internet, this is Kaiju Noir with another installment in my Heisei retrospective. Well, we're finally here. The grand finale to the Heisei era of Godzilla films, a series that began 11 years ago with the return of Godzilla. Now expectations are higher than ever, especially since this film marked the end for many involved in the franchise. Godzilla vs. Destoroyah was the last Godzilla film to involve the talents of producer Tomoyuki Tanaka and music composer Akira Ifukube. Two individuals who were the last remaining members of the original Godzilla team that started it all. This was also the last Godzilla film that special effects director Koichi Kawakita and Godzilla suit actor Kenpachiro Satsuma worked on. With this film being the last hurrah for many of these gifted individuals, let's jump right in and see how well they executed their swan song to the series. Right off the bat, the film starts off with Birth Island getting blown to smithereens due to a fission reaction of the island's natural uranium. As G-Force watches the destruction unfold, they notice that both Godzilla and his son are nowhere to be seen. Later that night, Godzilla appears in China wreaking havoc once again. Only this time, his body is now bursting with the nuclear energy he absorbed from Birth Island's destruction. This new power has made him stronger, more enraged, and has even allowed him to use his spiral atomic breath 24/7. While attempting to figure out the meaning behind Godzilla's transformation, the UNGCC manages to find a thesis developed by a young Japanese college student named Kenichi Yamane, or Kenkichi Yamane if you follow the Japanese dub, who is the son of Shinkichi Yamane, who is the boy that Dr. Yamane adopted during the events of the 1954 Godzilla film. As he is recruited as a scientific advisor, Kenichi explains that the nuclear fission in Godzilla's heart, which normally functioned as a nuclear reactor, has gone out of control, and that this unstable chemical reaction will end with Godzilla exploding and potentially setting the Earth's atmosphere ablaze. As this is happening, the plot introduces another individual named Dr. Ijuin, as he's interviewed on television by Kenichi's sister Yukari. Dr. Ijuin has made a scientific breakthrough with the invention of micro-oxygen, which are miniaturized oxygen atoms that can be used to produce smaller oxygen tanks, allow fish to grow larger due to its nourishment, and increase the world's food and energy supply. He also explains that micro-oxygen could potentially be weaponized, as the tiny atoms are capable of boring into any material and destroying it from the inside out when given the right amount of pressure. After the interview, Yukari meets up with her aunt Emiko, portrayed by Momoko Kochi, the same actress who played her in Godzilla 54. She warns Yukari that the micro-oxygen technology is very similar in nature to Dr. Serizawa's oxygen destroyer, the device used to kill the original Godzilla. Yukari then confronts Ijuin with this information, only to be told that whatever happens, he will not allow this technology to become another weapon of mass destruction. As this is all happening, a number of mysterious accidents take place at an underground construction site, placed over the spot where the original Godzilla died. Ijuin later digs up soil samples from the site in order to study its Precambrian and zero-oxygen nature. Meanwhile at G-Force, Kenichi brings up a proposal to recreate the oxygen destroyer using Ijuin's invention in order to kill Godzilla, since any form of weaponry could potentially lead to a nuclear holocaust. But before an oxygen destroyer can be made, a new threat is spotlighted, as the soil that Ijuin dug from contained Precambrian crustaceous lifeforms that were reawakened and mutated by the original oxygen destroyer 40 years ago. Once these creatures were exposed to the air, they rapidly evolved and developed the ability to use micro-oxygen, not just to nourish themselves, but to also use it as a weapon to destroy anything that crosses their path, thus becoming living oxygen destroyers. These organic destroyers keep growing until they eventually combine into one giant monster, Destoroyah. Eventually, the son of Godzilla resurfaces, now fully grown as a result of the Birth Island incident. With humanity running out of time, both G-Force and the JSDF must find a way to deal with all three monsters as Godzilla's death, and possibly the end to all life on Earth, approaches. If you haven't noticed by now, this plot pays a great deal of respect to the original 1954 film. The filmmakers even recreated the original Gojira title sequence before transitioning into the Godzilla vs. Destoroyah title. Despite being released a year after Godzilla's 40th birthday, this film feels a lot more deserving of being an anniversary film than Space Godzilla was. Which leads me to believe that a greater effort was made on Toho's part to plan out and execute this film, while Space Godzilla seemed like a side project to act as filler between Mechagodzilla 2 and this film. Things become a lot more clear when you consider the fact that Toho had to make Space Godzilla at the same time they were making Orochi the 8-headed dragon, which clearly featured the better production values. Speaking of Godzilla 54, this is the only time in the Heisei series where the characters in the film acknowledge the existence of two Godzillas in this continuity, those being the 1954 Godzilla and the Heisei Godzilla that we've been following since 1984. Even though this goes against what the previous films have led me to believe, this does make sense. While the 1954 Godzilla has never been brought up as being a separate creature, it's certainly possible that, like in the Showa series, the second Godzilla was simply treated as the same creature. When the protagonists from King Ghidorah traveled back in time to prevent Godzilla's creation, they were trying to prevent Heisei Godzilla's existence, which just so happened to share the exact same World War II nuclear origins as Godzilla 54. I only wish that the characters from King Ghidorah would have specified which Godzilla they were going after if they were attempting to wipe out Godzilla from history. Then again, we all know the confusing and illogical writing of that film. If there's one complaint I can make about this film's plot, it's that it all seems way too convenient that all of these unrelated events just so happen to occur at the same time. Just think about it. Ijuin just so happens to create an oxygen destroyer type invention, just as oxygen destroyer spawned monsters appear, all while a dying Godzilla is about to destroy the world and can possibly be killed by means of an oxygen destroyer. However, this convenience never bothered me during my viewing experience, as all three plot devices are interwoven to the point where the narrative can't succeed without all three working in tandem with one another. It's similar to how a film like Back to the Future can work ever so brilliantly despite having specific events conveniently take place within the same time frame in order for the plot to work. In the case of this film, you gotta have a story revolve around Godzilla because, obviously, he's the star of the film. Destoroyah is here because he's meant to serve as the ultimate opponent, and appropriately so considering he's a product of the oxygen destroyer, the one thing that has ever successfully killed a Godzilla. Finally, Ijuin's role in the story is to deliver exposition on the micro-oxygen that Destoroyah uses, while also playing up the morality factor of whether or not the world would benefit from the existence of a device as deadly as the oxygen destroyer. As for our cast, the film features some of the series' most well-written characters, with each individual playing a vital role in determining the fate of both Godzilla and the world. It's important to note that a lot of the first act is filled to the brim with exposition, in order to set the stage for Destoroyah's appearance and the eventual confrontation between it and the Godzillas. Luckily for us, we have these engaging characters, and even a veteran Godzilla actor here to handle this slower aspect of the film. Also, this film is pretty unique as it features dual protagonists in the form of Kenichi and Yukari, who are not only representing the legacy of Dr. Yamane, but are also the next generation of individuals tasked with overseeing mankind's progress. Kenichi was expected by his father to follow in his grandfather's footsteps, but unfortunately could not become a successful scientist due to constantly failing his exams. Kenichi appears to show some guilt over not being able to live up to his father's expectations, and most likely uses this as a motivation to study Godzilla. Seeing how knowledgeable he is in the field of radiology, I theorize that he's like many people who clearly know the material, but can't handle the pressure when it comes to applying that knowledge to written exams. Unfortunately for him, his lack of credentials prevents anyone in Japan from taking him seriously. Interestingly, he claims that he treats his studies on Godzilla as a hobby, as he initially refused the UNGCC's offer to work with them, and further explains that he didn't want to deal with all the hassle that comes with being a scientist. Something tells me that his past failures have made him pessimistic when it comes to his future, and ended up becoming less proactive as a result of this attitude. Of course, he immediately takes the opportunity to join them in order to meet the famed Miki Sagusa. Well, he is a young man after all. While Kenichi failed to become a legit scientist, his sister Yukari took a completely different career path and became a television reporter. In a way, both siblings have taken on traditional roles seen in numerous Godzilla films, those being the knowledgeable scientist and the outgoing journalist. This decision was a nice departure from the more militaristic environments that the cast from the last two films were a part of. As a reporter, Yukari is straightforward and to the point. She demands all the facts and is very observant, as she would notice details that others would overlook. On one such occasion, she sees Ijuin taking samples from the construction site, and immediately made note of the location, and eventually confirmed that this was the area where Godzilla 54 died. As the plot progressed, the writing did a great job at pitting these two siblings at odds with one another, with Kenichi wanting to use the oxygen destroyer against his aunt's wishes, while Yukari, on the other hand, is more concerned with the aftermath of using such a weapon. Both of them bring solid points to the table, and neither is truly right or wrong. All of this makes for a moral debate that perfectly encapsulates the themes of the first film, considering how these two characters are linked to the very individual who invented the oxygen destroyer, and it's made clear that both siblings are fully aware of its frightening power more than anyone thanks to their aunt. As for the film's other expository individual, Ijuin is a highly optimistic man who truly wishes to use his inventions to benefit society. He wants to learn from the past so that he will not make the same mistakes. He shows a large amount of respect towards the late Dr. Serizawa, as he was inspired by his work, and even praised him when he vaguely explained to the press why he was at the construction site. Ijuin's micro-oxygen appears to be his way of honoring Serizawa's memory on the anniversary of his death, by attempting to pull off what Serizawa was afraid to do. Now that the metaphorical ghost of Serizawa's invention has come back to haunt Japan, Ijuin is given a grim reminder of the dangers that come with great discoveries, even if they were made or even used under the most noble of intentions. In her final role in the Heisei series, Miki leads a team of scientists to monitor Godzilla Jr.'s activities. This is an appropriate position for her, given how sympathetic she's been towards him since he first appeared in Mechagodzilla 2. It's possible that she wants to keep him safe so that he would not become a monster like his father. Thankfully, this gives her a far more active role in comparison to her last film. The movie also introduces Meru Ozawa, as she joins G-Force's Psychic Division alongside Miki to study burning Godzilla's current activity, while Miki focuses on Junior. When Miki later reveals to Meru that her powers have started to fade, I wonder if Meru was actually brought in as her replacement. She serves as an interesting contrast to Miki, as she only recently began working under the Godzilla research team, yet already she's waiting for her powers to fade just like Miki's, so that she could live a normal life. This is the exact opposite attitude for Miki, as she has been able to dedicate the last 7 years of her life to G-Force, thanks to her powers, so the thought of life after G-Force is a despairing thought for her. Another trait that differentiates the two of them is that, like Kenichi, Meru thinks more logically, and believes that sentimentality has no place in her line of work. This is why she supports Kenichi's proposal to use Junior in order to lure Godzilla towards Destoroyah's location, even if it means Junior's possible death. Miki is greatly opposed to this, which is very natural of her considering how this goes against everything she stood for. Yet, unlike the Miki we saw in Space Godzilla, she is able to understand the severity of the situation, and realizes that by protecting Junior, she is putting the entire planet at risk. In a rather bold move, she assists Meru in directing Junior towards Destoroyah's location in Tokyo, and plans to see this mission all the way through, thus allowing her to stay with Junior till the very end. Overall, these characters serve to show how far humanity has come since the Heisei series started, and even reveals a glimpse into the future of this continuity, as we see a new generation of talented minds joining together in order to protect the planet at its darkest hour. When it comes to the special effects, we finally move past the flashy aesthetics of the Beam Wars trilogy, and are instead greeted with something a lot more subdued, which complements the film's moody theme and atmosphere. Much like past Heisei films and their attempts to capitalize on popular American films, this one has an entire sequence dedicated to ripping off aliens. In a scene where the Japanese Self-Defense Force soldiers infiltrate and confront the human-sized Destoroyahs, the strong influence from James Cameron's work can be found here in the cinematography. Throughout the sequence, you'll find examples of handheld shaky camera work, Dutch angles, and extreme close-ups, all within an enclosed and discomforting environment. The sequence then follows certain tropes commonly found in horror films. For example, we have the idiotic victim who chooses to hide in an easy-to-find spot, rather than running away, as well as having the car not work at the worst possible moment. This style of cinematography feels a lot different from the rest of the film, and can be a bit jarring at first, but for me personally, it works at providing the audience an action scene that differs from what the previous films had to offer. At a certain point in the film, the JSDF launches the Super X-3 to slow down Godzilla's rapidly increasing body temperature with its freeze-based weaponry. The use of the Super X3 as Japan's last weapon against Godzilla is a nice piece of fan service considering how the Super X1 and 2 were Japan's first advances in technology at the beginning of this continuity. Even better is that the character piloting the Super X3 is Sho Kuroki, the same individual who piloted the Super X2 from Biollante. Only here, he isn't played by Masanobu Takashima, but instead he's portrayed by the actor's brother, Masahiro Takashima, who we've previously seen in Gunhead, Mechagodzilla 2, and Orochi. While it is a little disappointing at first that the humans don't have another giant robot this time around, it makes sense considering how all of their salvaged giant robot technology was pretty much destroyed after Mogura's defeat. Also, having a giant robot would only worsen this particular situation, since any damage towards Godzilla would have led to cataclysmic results. Finally, it's extremely plausible that the Japanese Self-Defense Force would make a third Super X on the side, while G-Force was working on more advanced machinery. In the end, the Super X3's appearance feels more like a back-to-basics throwback, and allows the kaiju story to mainly focus on Godzilla and his new foe, without any distractions that can hinder the climax. Also, the abundance of Self-Defense Force machinery makes up for the lack of a mech. While these types of military vehicles have already appeared in previous Heisei films, the way they're presented here gives them much more of a prominent role. It gives the impression that the JSDF was taking back its role as Japan's greatest defense after relying on G-Force for the last two films. These newer vehicles feel very Showa-esque, and Akira Ifukube's music only accentuates this comparison. Before we dive into our two titular kaijus, I'd like to take a minute to discuss Godzilla Jr.'s role in the film. I have to say, it was a great move on Toho's part to finally give its audience a fully grown version of the son of Godzilla. Design-wise, he's a unique blend of his previous appearances. He regains the horizontal stance and body structure of Baby Godzilla and the Godzillasaurus, as well as the vibrant green skin of Little Godzilla, as well as the skin texture and facial features of his father. Due to Junior's relatively smaller size, he's portrayed by a puppet whenever he's on screen with his father or Destoroyah's final form. The attempt is admirable, though it doesn't entirely work in brief shots where we can clearly see that the Junior puppet can't move any part of its body below the neck. So when we see it move to the side or get picked up by Destoroyah, it looks incredibly awkward. As for the suit used for every other sequence, it looks great save for the neck, as the loose skin gives the impression that it's hollow inside. Character-wise, Junior has gone through a drastic change, as he's no longer the wide-eyed innocent infant that always relied on his parental figures. Now he's a much more violent creature, as he's shown being able to sustain himself by feeding off of whales, and being able to defend himself against Destoroyah's initial combined forms. There are bits of his old personality intact, as he is not a completely vicious monster, but is instead trying to find his way back to his original home on Adanoa Island from Mechagodzilla 2. Unfortunately for him, this chance at happiness is denied, as Mickey and Meru regrettably lure him into a death trap. In a way, this allows him to follow in his father's footsteps, as being forced by the humans to walk a path of pain and misery. For the final film of the Heisei series, Destoroyah succeeds in almost every way possible. I know plenty of people have already made this comparison before, and many more will continue to do so. Yes, his nightmarish appearance makes him look like the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. Just kidding, it's the devil. When you stop to think about it, what other opponent could you really get to fight Godzilla other than Satan himself? If he was fused with a crab. It's also a fantastic idea for his last opponent to look like something that came out of hell, as Godzilla is knocking at death's door. So what better way to emphasize this than to depict some form of a Grim Reaper to bring Godzilla to the gates of hell? As stated before, his origins are perfect for creating the ultimate opponent, as both creatures were accidental creations of two horrific weapons of mass destruction, those being the atomic bomb and the oxygen destroyer. Each represent the grave misuse of power, and the horrific aftermath that resulted from it. But unlike Godzilla, who is capable of feeling sympathy towards others, Destoroyah harbors no such love for anyone or anything. All it cares about is domination. This is all the more apparent in the final battle, as he fatally injures Junior while proceeding to inflict further harm on the dying Saurian. He is also prone to fighting as dirty as possible, such as when he attempted to split into a swarm of smaller Destoroyahs to escape, and shoots Godzilla from behind later on. Speaking of which, this is probably the most complex creature we've had in the Godzilla franchise since Hedorah the Smog Monster. Coincidentally or not, both kaijus came from abnormal microscopic species that eventually assimilated into larger creatures while developing multiple forms as a means of traverse and survival. Effects-wise, this Destoroyah suit does share the same mobility issues seen in Space Godzilla and Mechagodzilla. However, unlike the previous films and their excessive use of beam spamming, the fight sequences involving Destoroyah manages to blend projectile attacks with good old-fashioned physical combat, and even bloodshed. The filmmakers even worked around Destoroyah's limited flexibility with attacks such as the Horn Katana, along with his tail that is strong enough to drag Godzilla around like a ragdoll. Sure, his wings don't move much in certain sequences, such as the aforementioned tail dragging shots, but I feel that enough is taking place on screen to the point where your eyes wouldn't be focusing solely on the wings alone. At least in shots that do focus completely on Destoroyah, his wings are indeed moving. Finally, we get to cover the Big G one last time. In this film, Godzilla's own body is now working against him, as the nuclear energy he's been absorbing is now painfully heating up as his heart is going into critical mass. Turning Godzilla into a literal atomic bomb is a fitting way to kill off the character due to having been originally created as an allegory for the atomic bomb. Even the detail surrounding his transformation into Burning Godzilla is perfect, as it's a sad reminder that Godzilla can never enjoy a normal, non-violent life. Here he was, finally living with his son on a secluded island, only to have it taken away from him in an explosion that was out of his control. But rather than dying right then and there, he was forced to live an even more excruciating state of existence, and is now lashing out at the world in retaliation. Even then, there was a sliver of hope within his son. Never wanting to be left alone, he searches for Junior, and for a moment it almost seemed as if he was going to achieve some satisfaction in being reunited with his now grown-up son. However, Junior, his one companion and the only source of comfort in his life, was killed before his very eyes by the devil himself. Now he has nothing left to lose, and death is quickly catching up to him, leaving Godzilla with only one option, and that is to make his last stand, and prove once and for all who is, and always will be, the King of the Monsters. The suit used to portray Burning Godzilla is a magnificent achievement in suitmation, and is perhaps the most complex suit ever designed for the character. From what I've gathered, the special effects team took the suit from the last film and removed large chunks from it so that they can install roughly 200 light bulbs and cover the areas with brightly colored semi-transparent vinyl plates. On top of that, extra mechanisms were installed to have the suit give off steam, which made it rather difficult for Kenpachiro Satsuma to perform in, as he would faint several times during production due to the excess carbon monoxide that the steam generated. Finally, I can't talk about Godzilla without discussing his death sequence, which is the moment that everything in this film and the series has been building up to. As the climactic battle draws to a close, you can see just how agonizing the meltdown is for Godzilla. The flow of energy is so intense that his own spines begin to melt. Not only is Godzilla fighting Destoroyah, but he is now trying to hold off his demise just a little longer, making for one of the most intense battles in the franchise. As disappointing as it is to not see Godzilla directly kill Destoroyah, I do see what the filmmakers were trying to go for. Here, Godzilla manages to humiliate the devil himself, as he not only mortally wounds him, but sends him running for his life. Finally, the Japanese self-defense force finishes off Destoroyah, as it used its weakness to freezing temperatures to finally bring an end to Destoroyah, thus showing how far humanity has come in terms of defending themselves against giant monsters. With the battle all over, we see the humans bid a bittersweet farewell with both their words and their weapons. Godzilla gives one last defiant roar before melting away and turning Tokyo into a nuclear wasteland. Through poetic justice, Godzilla managed to leave this world the same way he entered it, as a result and reminder of mankind's arrogance and the misuse of science and technology. However, fate has decided that mankind is not yet ready to move on without an overseer watching their progress, which is why Godzilla had managed to leave behind a successor to continue his legacy. Godzilla vs. Destoroyah is a film that was tasked with ending the Heisei series and bringing about the definitive end to this incarnation of Godzilla. This film manages to do all of this and leaving the series off on a high note. It manages to take the crazy twists and turns of this continuity and lead them to their logical endpoint. The plot, writing, and characters, both new and old, left me with a feeling of satisfaction. The special effects were a technical marvel that exceeded expectations, and the ending gave me an even greater appreciation for the Heisei series as a whole. Finally, the filmmakers introduced Godzilla fans to what is arguably the franchise's greatest original kaiju made over the last 2 decades. Due to these numerous accomplishments and my overall enjoyment of the film, I rate Godzilla vs. Destoroyah a 5 out of 5. Despite the varying quality of the Heisei Godzilla series, especially during the later half, it managed to start off on a high note and end with a spectacular bang. I hope you've enjoyed this retrospective look on this particular era of Godzilla's history, and that you may have found a new interest in these films, or that you perhaps found new appreciation for all the work put into this series. While we may have closed the book on Godzilla, we're still not out of the woods yet, as Toho would continue to make special effects heavy films throughout the second half of the 90s. However, before we go into those films, I'd like to take a small break for the holidays and take the time to discuss a certain anime series from my second favorite franchise of all time. So until next time everybody, take care and happy holidays!
December, Universal Century 0079.
Scramble, form a defensive line!
The one-year war is drawing to a close.
Under attack by 2 dog-type movement suits!
The Earth Federation has the upper hand in the neutral colony Side 6.
Report to your station!
Elite Zeon Special Forces are dispatched to destroy the Federation's secret weapon, the Gundam. Zeon's only ally, an 11-year-old boy named Alfred Izaruha.
Yeah!
For him, war was a distant game.
Fighting inside a colony? You can't do this!
Caught between loyalties, Al must make the ultimate choice. The stakes, life and death.
We're not playing games here, you know.
The price of failure,
This colony's going to be destroyed, all right?
nuclear annihilation. Gundam 0080, a midnight run exclusive. Premiering Monday, November 5th at 12:30. In war, everyone's a casualty. Only Tommy.